seems from the text that Hashem, the message of the Akedah is that God is not interested in human sacrifices, and because Abraham eventually is being told to put the knife down and not do it. The only thing that might indicate that Hashem is in favor is verse 12, where the angel says, "Ki ata yadati ki yireh Elohim ata, velo chasachta et bincha et yachidecha mimeni." Now I know that you truly revere God, because you did not withhold your son, your favorite one, from me, right? But this is only if we take this verse out of context. When we see the whole story, it seems like you say that the Torah is against this concept of human sacrifice. So this is what I want to discuss. I want to suggest that maybe there was something that happened later on in Jewish history that pushed us back towards the acceptance of human sacrifices. Of course, not in the traditional pagan way of slaughtering people as a sacrifice of their gods, but rather as someone sacrificing his own life for the sake of observing the Torah. So we have this discussion in Sanhedrin, in the Talmud Sanhedrin, page 74a, and I'm reading here. Rabbi Yohanan said in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yotzadok, by a majority vote, it was resolved in the upper chambers of the house of Nitzah in Lida, that in every other law of the Torah, if a man is commanded, transgress and suffer not death, he may transgress and not suffer death, except for idolatry, incest, and murder. This is a famous statement in Jewish law. They are called the three capital transgressions: shlichut damim, gilui arayot, v'avodah zarah, murder, incest, and idolatry, for which one is supposed to, if one is being told either commit those sins, or if you don't do that, we'll kill you, he's supposed to sacrifice his life and not die. And that is accepted. I think that if you ask any student of Torah who grew up in a traditional yeshivot, and you would say, what are the three sins for which you must die and never transgress? He will say idolatry, adultery, and murder. But the interesting thing here is, if you look at the beginning of this Talmudic passage, it says, by a majority vote, it was resolved. So when we see a majority vote, it means it's not clear cut, that there was a certain dispute, that there was a debate. So what was the debate? And what was the practice prior to the debate? So would people die for everything, or would people die for nothing? That's an interesting question. We know today from sectarian Judaism, from the writings of the Dead Sea sects, that indeed before this decision was made by the rabbis, people felt that they cannot transgress the word of God, and it was not really a question of human sacrifices. When we compare it to the story of Abraham, it was not really correlated to the story of Abraham yet. That is something that happened later on. Probably we'll see with the rise of Christianity. The way people perceived it at the time before that passage, up to the time we would say of the war of the Maccabees against the Greeks, was that under no circumstances you're allowed to transgress any concept of the Torah. As simple as that. The person, if a person was put in a situation of either do that or die, he would not think that he's allowed to transgress. He would feel that this is his natural commitment to always upkeep the word of the Torah. Also, there weren't really many circumstances like that where there was a clash between observance, obedience, or preserving one's life. Because up until to the Maccabean period, we either had independence and were able to observe what we observed, or we were controlled by ruthless dictators who killed everyone and didn't give any option of, would you like to eat pork, or shall we put you to death by sword? There was no such option. During the Maccabean revolt, during the war, something happened, which, according to historians, what happened was that the Greeks attacked. In one of the wars that went between the Greeks and the Maccabees, the war took place on Shabbat, and the Jews, facing this, we say, relatively new, confusing situation, decided not to fight back because Shabbat is above all. And once the Greeks realized that, well, we have this opportunity, this window of opportunity to attack without resistance, they start carrying out more attacks on Shabbat, and then the need rose to let us reevaluate the Halacha because it doesn't work that way. It doesn't. It's not functional. So they came to a vote, and we find a vote where the rabbi debate whether what comes first, your life or the observance of the mitzvot. Before that, one's life was always secondary to the observance of the mitzvot, and we find an echo to that in sectarian Judaism, in the Miktzat Maaseh Torah, the scroll of laws from the Dead Sea sect, where it says that if someone falls into a pit on the day of Shabbat, tough luck. Let him remain there until Shabbat is over, and then we'll try to pull him out, but we cannot transgress the Shabbat for him. They still kept the halacha that way. But the rabbis got together and they came up with a logical argument, which is ele mitzvot Torah asher yaseh adam v'chai bahem. One should live by the words of the Torah, not die. And amra Torah halel alav Shabbat achad b'shvil shishmor Shabbatot harbeh. It is worthwhile to transgress one Shabbat in order to be able to observe many other Shabbatot. Same way, in any other mitzvah, if one is being told, like I said before, eat pork, eat something not kosher, or will kill you, it's better for him to eat that non-kosher product for temporarily transgress one mitzvah in order for him to be able to live and survive and observe other mitzvot. So now that they're in the process of voting on it, the first stage actually, which is not in this source, was preserving your life takes precedence in most cases. And now they asked the question, are there any exceptions? Are there any cases where you must die and not transgress? So they came up with those three: idolatry, incest, and murder. So let me present this question. From those three, idolatry, incest, and murder, which is the most logical? Which is the first that would you say, I understand why I would rather die than transgress this prohibition?
I think the first one.
Idolatry?
Murder.
Idolatry? Okay. So okay. No. I heard two answers. Nobody says incest. Interesting. Okay. But we have either idolatry. Here at the table, we either have idolatry or murder. So now what would be the argument for idolatry? That seems the initial, our intuitive reaction as Jews. When you're being asked, what is the thing that you're going to die for and not do? It will be right away idolatry. I would never bow down to idols, except for American Idol. But other than that, I'm an observant Jew. I believe in God, and we have actually a case of many Jews who were not so observant, who were assimilated and who tried to leave Judaism, but when they were faced with this choice, bow down to idols, accept a different religion, or die, they decided to die. But as a matter of fact, the concept that was most logical for the rabbis to say, this is the core concept for which one must die and not transgress, it was murder. Why? Because they said, "My hazid de damadidach sumak tfei." Is your blood redder than the blood of another person? Life, you have a balance of one life versus the other. And how are we going to make this choice? This is a concept that later on became the basis for many moral discussions. Would you push someone into the rail tracks in order to save other people, to save one? Would you sacrifice one to save many? Many questions like that. But the rabbis, this they understood very logically to be clear that one must die and not kill another person. The next step was that everybody agreed on. Okay, now we have incest and idolatry. Which one of them you think made more sense to the rabbis that you must die for?
I think incest.
Yes, it must have been.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, we're in a learning curve. So yes, the next one was incest, and that was derived from a verse in Devarim, in Deuteronomy, which speaks about a woman is being violated, and it says, "Ki ka'asher yakum ish al re'ehu u'rtzacho nefesh ken hadavar hazeh." The act of rape is tantamount to murder. So just as in murder you would not kill another person to save yourself, so also you would not commit incest or rape to save yourself. So what was the one, if they voted in order to decide what should you die for or not, what was the one that was disputable?
Yeah,
Idolatry.
and you know why? They were all men.
Idolatry. Like, what?
They were all men.
They were all...
Well, there's a rich history of idolatry in the kingdom of Israel.
Yes,
New wives,
yes,
wives,
right.
and led to bad things, but there's a rich history.
Right, idolatry. Right, the Tanakh, the Bible, is replete with idolatry, in a terrifying way. That the rabbis actually had to deal with it by coming up with the concept of an external Yetzer Hara. They had to portray all the people who lived during the first temple as righteous, highly spiritual people who, if not for this external devil Yetzer Hara that was appointed by God, they would never sin, which is a topic for another discussion. But in this, yeah, no. So the question is really this: we take it for granted. Idolatry is the first thing, almost our gut reaction, that this is what you die for. And here you find, actually previously in the Talmud, Rabbi Shmer says you only sacrifice your life to not commit murder or incest, but not for idolatry. What would be the logic there, Aviv?
Effect does coerced bowing down to an idol have? There's no significance.
Right.
It's just
Right, now when you think of it logically, it makes perfect sense. If one is being coerced to kill someone, and he does that, then we have a dead body. Right? Or hurting someone, rape or violation, then we have a victim. If someone is forced to bow down to an idol, who's the victim?
Individual.
That's the
individual.
that gives me cocktail. That gives me a big headache.
The question?
The idolatry thing.
Idolatry. Okay, it gave the rabbis also a big headache.
I bet.
Yes.
But all through our history, I mean, for instance, with the thing you brought up, they were throwing their babies at one time, not necessarily the Jews, but where idolatry was, they were throwing their babies into
The fire.
The fire.
Right, that's the molech.
Exactly.
The molech. Okay.
Now, would you want to encourage that by being part of it?
Okay, that's a good question, and I'll show you in one of the sources that we have here that this actually took place in the Jewish people as well. That people sacrificed or killing their own children. So, Yehezkel speaks about idolatry. It is in the Bible. There are references to people doing it for idols, but in that we're going to go try to cover all the sources, and we'll see that we have this in Jewish tradition as well, but much later on. So what we find here, basically, just leave it as that there was a dispute that not everybody agreed that you should sacrifice your life for idolatry, because they felt, the Rabbi Ishmael who argued that felt that there's no victim. God is not offended by that because God knows my true intention. And if I'm coerced to worship idols, but I save my life and then I'll be able to practice Judaism somewhere else, then good for me. And then maybe it's better. The fear was, as you said, Stanley, that it's a danger to the individual. What if that individual loses his faith and eventually decides to live as a non-Jew? Danny. Yeah.
You had the historical experiences, I think, in the Crusades.
Okay, it's here. Yeah, we'll get there.
But the Spanish Jews had a difference.
Right.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, 100%. We're going in that direction. Danny made a good point. During the Crusades, there were cases of suicide and murder or infanticide, where people killed their own children. During the Spanish Inquisition, the reaction was different. Most Jews were, when they were faced with the choice of converting to Christianity or dying, they took off. They left, or they remained Marranos, they remained Anusim, and went underground. So now, looking historically at that question, which we'll do later on with more detail, one asked the question, so what was better? For many, many centuries, scholars rebuked Spanish Jews, Sephardic Jews. They said they were weak, they had no faith, they couldn't face their enemies, they converted or they ran away, and they praised the Jews who during the Crusades sacrificed their lives and stood for their faith. But now there's a tendency in modern history to look at it differently. And like I said, I'm going to show that through our liturgy, even liturgy that's included in the Sephardic Siddur, we see the differences. And I want to argue something even more than that. That this there is really a discrepancy, a major difference between the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic view, and it affected the way that the Sephardic world and the Ashkenazi world evolved. Where in the Ashkenazi world it was all or nothing. Either you're a Jew, a Christian, or a dead body. Those are the three options. Right? Either a Jew, a non-Jew, or dead. Where in the Sephardic world it was, okay, there are many nuances in between, and I'll try to do what I can to remain alive. Not for everyone, but for many people. And as a result, also, the way we practice Judaism and Halacha is different. Is more flexible and more inclusive. So we'll see when we get that. But yes.
What was the position of Maimonides?
Oh, we didn't get to Maimonides yet. We're going there. Yes.
But on the idolatry,
yes,
that's in the Haggadah. Our forefathers were idolaters because remember, Avram's father was. So it's okay to say, oh, well, as we're about to have a meal, our forefathers are idolaters. You don't really want to sit there and say, oh, by the way, our forefathers did incest and murder.
Right.
And just on the Tshuvot, during the Holocaust, Rabbi Oshry, Imam Hakim says you cannot get a fake baptismal certificate, but Rabbi Barzilai in Athens was involved in getting people fake baptismal certificates and fake ID cards saying that they were Christians.
Yes.
So completely different.
Yes.
I don't think anybody actually didn't get one because of Rabbi Oshry, by the way. I think.
No. I didn't know that he said that. It's interesting. And we're going to get also to the reaction during the Holocaust, where later on in the next session, Mezat Hashem, of the situation in the Warsaw Ghetto, where the Rabbi Menachem Zemba, actually had to issue a psak halacha, a decree saying that one must fight for his life and not sacrifice his life, because otherwise this is what people were going to do. So we're going back to the sources for a second. Hopefully we'll be able to cover these today. So first we saw this dispute. Not everybody agreed on that, but eventually they voted that we sacrifice his life for that also. And idolatry came really to the forefront of those three. It was not very common that someone would say kill another person, or even if that happened, it was very limited individual cases. But as a mass movement, usually it was idolatry. And then we have the following. Rav Dimi came, this is the next paragraph, he said, only if there is no royal decree. If there is a royal decree, one must incur martyrdom rather than transgress even a minor precept. Like for everything you must die. And then they add, Rabin, it's like each generation adds another element and says even without a royal decree, it was only permitted in private, but in public one must be martyred even for minor precept rather than violate it. So they add layers to it, and now they're saying, yeah, we told you that for Shabbat, for example, you could transgress Shabbat and stay alive, but not if it is done by a royal decree trying to force you to leave your religion behind, and not if it was done publicly. So now what is a minor precept? Rabbah, son of Rav Yitzhak, said in Rab's name, even to change one's shoe strap. And even that, by the way, translation is inaccurate. It's from the Sonsino Talmud in English. That is questionable. So the traditional reading among Ashkenazi rabbis was really that, to change one's shoe strap. For that you die. So there's a dispute there between Rashi and the Tosafot. One of them says that there was a certain way that the non-Jews would tie their sandals. It's what we call Roman sandals. The other one said that it was a certain color, that the Jews used black shoelaces or straps, and the non-Jews used red. So if one is being told either use a red shoe strap or will kill you, okay, he should die. It seems a little extreme, but we know, again, if we go back to the Holocaust, that we know that during the Holocaust, people would not shave their beard and would suffer beatings, and for other things, they continue. There is a different commentary here that comes from the Sephardic tradition, he doesn't accept, Rabbi Hananel does not accept that. He says, when we talk about the shoe strap and publicly, it means that one is being told bow down to the idol and he refuses. And we're talking about a public figure, someone who's a leader of the community. So they tell him, okay, so just tie your shoelaces in front of the idol, so people will think that you're bowing down to the idol. That is the minor precept, something that could be perceived as a transgression, but is not. But a misinterpretation of the text, or maybe it was not as much like a misinterpretation, but rather within a certain context, that of the Ashkenazi world, it seemed perfectly logical. Now, why did it seem logical? Because we're talking about Rashi and Tosafot. They live in the German Catholic world, and are familiar with the martyrology, or the literature of martyrdom, of the saints who sacrifice their lives for God. And the crucifixion itself is a symbol of a human sacrifice for the divine. So when this is so ubiquitous and you have it everywhere, it's hard not to be affected by it. And it's hard not to have some kind of an inferiority complex, saying, if the non-Jews are willing to do that for their God, how come I don't do it for my God? So when you face the choice between life or death for God, so, oh yeah, let me have it. This is what I must do. And there's one case, even documented case in England in the 1300s, of a rabbi who committed suicide, hanging himself on something that looks like a cross. Basically, he crucified himself, and that following thoughts of how to dedicate himself to God, he spoke with other people in the yeshiva. This is documented. So we know that this tendency existed. Then
also the shoe thing is, there's this tradition, East European tradition, that you're supposed to put your right shoe on first.
Yes.
The Kohen Gadol would dress for the right side, and you're supposed to do the left lace first, because it's like the tefillin.
Yeah, the shoe straps are interesting. It's also in the Shulchan Aruch, right? It's also in the Shulchan Aruch that you must do the right first and then tie the left first. The interesting thing, though, is that in the Talmud, when this discussion appears, the Talmud says, if you want to do this, do this. If you want to do that, it's okay. Either way is fine. But we, with a combination of OCD and scrupulosity of doing things, rituals, we did that. In any case, there's another thing that the Ashkenazi tradition was affected by the Talmud of Eretz Yisrael. We call Talmud Yerushalmi. The tradition, the Babylonian Talmud was developed in Bavel, between the Babylonian and the Persian rule, and then carried on to Spain, to Sepharad and North Africa, whereas the Yerushalmi Talmud was studied in Eretz Yisrael, and then the tradition was carried to Italy, and with the first Italian families who immigrated from Bari, or imported from Bari to Cologne in Germany, came the tradition of the Yerushalmi Talmud. So what we find in the Talmud Yerushalmi, and this is not translated here, so I'll just read it to you. This is source number 2. I'm translating simultaneously. Rabbi Abar Bar Zemina was a tailor for a non-Jew in Rome. His master brought him basar de nevela. He brought him non-kosher meat and said, eat. He told him, you must eat it. Amar le leina achil. I'm not eating from it. He said, eat or I'll kill you. Echol delachen ana katil nalach. Amar le in ba'id miktal katil de'ana leina mechal besar denevela. He said, if you want to kill me because I'm not going to eat this non-kosher meat. Amar le, now the Roman is telling the Rabbi Taylor, Rabbi Snyder, maybe. Amar le, mehan modalach de'ilu achalt havina katil lach. You should know that had you eaten, I would have killed you. O Yehudi, or Aramai. Either you're a Jew or you're a Roman. Amar Rabbi Mana. So one of the rabbis commented on it. He said, Ilu Rabbi Bar Zemina, Shama Milion de Rabbanan, Mechal Hava. If this rabbi, this tailor, would have heard the decision of the rabbis, the vote, that one should not sacrifice his life, he would have eaten. And then what? He would have died. Right? He would have died. So the Yerushalmi basically argues that it was okay that he insisted. He risked his life, but it turned out for the better because otherwise the goy, the non-Jew, would have killed him. Now, that is something that was also carried by tradition, and people said, you see, standing up for your religion is better than giving in. You have to be strong. Right. So now, we saw the Talmud, Yerushalmi, which, as I said, affected the Ashkenazi tradition. Now let us see Maimonides. Semi brought up Maimonides. So I just took one line out of, it's not of context, you can see the whole chapter, but the whole chapter in Maimonides discusses the situations where one is obligated to sacrifice his life. And here brings an interesting twist of the plot. What happens if the Halacha says, transgress and do not sacrifice your life? What if you're in a situation where, according to Halacha, you're not required to die? Let's say we said in private, and not by royal decree, one is allowed to transgress and should not die. So, for example, if that, in the case of this tailor, he is with his master or his employer in his private chambers, and he says, "Why don't you eat from the meat?" Right? And he says, I cannot eat non-kosher meat. He says, if you don't eat, I'll kill you. So now let's evaluate that. It's in private, right? It's not done publicly. There's no royal decree or mass movement of coercion of making Jews leave their religion, and it's not murder, incest, or idolatry. Therefore, you should eat. What if that man, like Rabbi Abba, the one we read about before, decided to stand up for his religion and refuse? And as a result, he would be killed. Was it right or wrong? Says Rambam, if anyone about whom it is said, transgress and do not sacrifice your life, sacrifices his life and does not transgress, he is held accountable for his life. In the Hebrew, which is, of course, not something that is punishable in a human bedin, right? After he died, nobody's going to bring him to court and to say you deserve the capital punishment. But what Rambam says is that when that man dies and comes to heaven and present himself as a martyr or as a saint or a shaheed or whatever it is, God will say, I'm sorry, you don't belong here. You belong in the other department, the basement, right? Because you committed suicide. That's what Rambam says. Now, and I'll ask, do you see the logic of that? Does it make sense, right? Rambam seems to make sense. But the Bet Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo, makes the following statement in his commentary to Yoreh De'ah, and it's based on previous sources. And I only have the Hebrew. I look at the second line. Perush שבשעת השמד יכול למסור עצמו למיתה ולהרוג את עצמו אם הוא יראה שלא יוכל לעמוד בניסיון. So, from a certain source, the Bet Yosef derives, or not himself, he quotes others who say that in a certain situation, one is allowed to sacrifice his life if he he fears that he would not be able to stay strong to the end. Meaning that they will say, bow down to the idols, and he thinks that if he is not able to withstand torture, and he might do it eventually, so he's allowed to commit suicide. Umikan, I'm going to the fifth line here. Umikan mevi'im re'aya hashochatim hatinokot b'sha'at hashmad. And that discussion in the Talmud or in the Midrash was used by the people who slaughtered the children at the time of persecution. And he refers to the Crusades. There are many accounts from the Crusades, from Mainz and Worms, from these communities in Germany, where people, mothers and fathers, slaughtered their own children and then committed suicide. And right, like Masada. So, and I'll talk about Masada in a second. So people did that during persecution, and they relied on that comment of that Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. This whole thing is based on the story of Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, who lived in Bavel, and in the book of Daniel, during the time of Nebuchadnezzar, there was a decree that everybody must bow down to the idols, and if not, it's going to be thrown into the furnace. And Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah chose to be seen out publicly, not bowing to the idol at the designated time. Meaning they, in a sense, they committed suicide, because they could have been indoors, nobody would see them. The decree was only against the people who do it publicly. So they rely on this pasuk. Veyesh osrim, the Bet Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo adds, but some opinions are against it. ומפרשים אך תלמוד לומר שאינו יכול להרוג עצמו. וחנניה, מישאל ועזריה מסרו עצמם ביד אחרים, אבל הם לא פגעו בעצמם. So even if you try to bring a proof from the case of those three, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, they put themselves in this precarious situation that eventually they were thrown into the furnace, but they did not kill themselves. We don't have a proof that one is allowed to commit suicide in the name of God. Shaul ben Kish, shelo birtzon hachayim asa. And if we try to rely on the case of King Saul, who fell on his sword before being captured by the Philistines, they say shelo birtzon hachayim asa. That the fact that he did it doesn't mean that it was okay. Maybe it was against the will of the rabbis of the Halacha. U'ma'aseh, and now we move into a real story. Ma'aseh berav ehad sheshahat tinokot arbe b'shat hashmad sheyare sheyavirum al dat. Was this rabbi, this scholar, he refers to one story that circulated in Europe after the Crusades, that one of the leaders of the community killed the children because he was afraid that they will be converted, they will be raised as Christians. The other rabbi called the first one a murderer, but he did not pay him heed. The one who objected said, if I'm right, you will not die a natural death. It's like not a very pleasant story, and that was really the case. He was tortured to death. And later on, this decree or this persecution was cancelled, and who knows, maybe these children would have survived and would be able to live as Jews. So this is a debate that took place in Europe. Already in Europe, in Germany, there were different opinions, but definitely when we look at the Sephardic school of thought and the Ashkenazi school of thought, we see the split where the Maimonides and Yosef Karo say that one is not allowed. There's no such thing as being mahmir, right, or being strict regarding Kiddush Hashem. They say, even though I'm not obligated, I just think it's okay to die for that mitzvah. But rather they say this is completely forbidden. Whereas in the Ashkenazi world, we see this is considered a lofty approach, one who does it is a saint. And it's obvious when we look today historically at that development that the influence of Islam and Christianity plays a role here, because in Islam, even though today people talk about shaheeds and the whole suicide bombers or homicide bombers, this was not part of Muslim theology in medieval times. It was an essential part of Christian theology. The legends and the stories of the early Christians who were persecuted by the Romans, who lived in the catacombs under the city of Rome, who were thrown to the lions and became later on saints. And if they were not tortured by others, they tortured themselves. There were different orders of monks and priests who would afflict themselves. It still exists today, Opus Dei. I know this from the picture.
If you want to be a martyr,
yes.
You want to be a martyr, nothing stops you.
Right. If one wants to do that, yes, there's a now here's an interesting concept what Helen brings up, that if one wants to be a martyr, nothing will stop you. So there is in some cases there must be a combination of suicidal tendencies and the will to become a martyr for God. But in other cases, it's the spiritual devotion that could really completely overtake a person, because we have embedded in us, in our psyche, a craving for the divine. This is something that theologians and philosophers tried to figure out for many centuries, but recently it was discussed first by people who studied religion theology systematically, mainly Emil Durkheim and William James. In the varieties of religious experience, they speak about the fact that what we call an epiphany, or all of a sudden an enlightenment, and the feeling of great delight, is something that is part of the human experience. Later on, when the human genome was decoded, the God gene was identified. It's like, and this caused a new very interesting dispute between the atheists and the believers, because the atheists, you say there's a gene that we were able to isolate in our DNA that makes you believe things and makes you believe in God. So we are wired for religion, and right, some more than others, like in everything, right. But wait, the believers say 100%. You're right. Who's the programmer? Who's the chief technician? Who put the gene in the DNA? So what I'm saying that because for the people who are drawn into that world of devotion, at a certain point they feel that they are nothing. They are but a vehicle, a vessel that carries the divine light, and they are carrying out the divine will. So for them, passing that threshold and saying the divine will is for me to die, and by doing that, I'm doing the greatest thing in my life, and they don't look at it as suicide anymore. This is the mission of their lives, and we're not taking others with them. It was only them. Yes.
But you're saying that as Jews, we're really reflecting the greater society in which we live, and we're going to the sources of the scriptures to find justification for what we see even in the Christian world and the Muslim.
Yes.
We're puppets.
We're not puppets. I hope not. Right.
The Ashkenazi tend to go towards the strict and ascetic Christian way.
Yes.
The Sephardim go flexible,
more relaxed.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's true. But it's not.
They go to the Tanakh, or they can find something here and there.
Right. So then he made the statement that it's a little scary, because if the Ashkenazi Jewish world was affected by Christianity and the Sephardic was affected by the Muslims, then we don't have a mind of our own. We're a little bit like puppets. But I think that just like the Muslims and the Christians are not puppets, and they were free thinkers among them, and there was always cross-fertilization between cultures. We are inextricably tied to previous civilizations. If you search Judaism and Christianity thoroughly enough, you realize that some things in the Tanakh are affected by the Akkadian and the Sumerian and even earlier cultures. So what we have is a constant negotiation, if you will, of our values, our understanding of the environment and the society in which we live, and trying to reconcile it with, in our case, with biblical values and with rabbinical theology. So, in the process, we lost a lot of people. Some of them physically, because they want to be very religious, and so they committed, this religious suicide. And some of them we lost spiritually, because they chose not to remain in the fold and left. And in between that, we've developed many different ways to deal with the world around us. Orthodoxy today, what we call Jewish Orthodoxy or modern Orthodoxy, is trying to create what it thinks is a sterilized version of Judaism with no outside influences, which
no such thing.
Yes, there's no such thing. There's no such thing. But not only there's no such thing, I think that the right approach would be, now that we have a deeper and a better historical perspective, to not be trapped in our understanding of the past and whatever happened before, but rather go back, try to assess why were things done the way they're done, and if they were not right, then we should be able to denounce them and move forward. Now, this was done with the Crusades. A leading Israeli historian, Israel Yuval, started analyzing that, and he argued that anti-Semitism in Europe rose after the Crusades as a reaction to the behavior of the Jews. And for that we have written evidence that the Christian world, the more moderate Christian world, because it's true that there was fanaticism among the Christians, and that they were the first Crusades was incensed by the words of Bernard of Clairvaux and others and other Christian leaders, and they swept through Europe, right, wreaking havoc, destroying cities, not only Jewish cities, but there were moderate people around them. But when they saw that Jews were behaving with such violence towards their own, they demonized the Jews even more. They took their hatred toward the Jews to a new level. Now, when Yuval made this statement in the 90s, he was attacked with fervor. But more and more, we find evidence. And now there's new interest in the literature of 1096 and forth, like what they call Gezerot Taf Taf Nun Vav, the First Crusade and on, and the influences of Christian literature and liturgy on the Haggadah and other elements. And it's obvious that there's a lot of influence that seeped into our cultural liturgy, halachot, and I think we're obligated to try to figure out what is original, as much as as we can define the word original. What is it that God really wants from us, in the words of Micha? So next week we'll start looking into the liturgy of the high holidays, and if you have time, for pre-reading, the two poems that I'm going to look at are both in the Sephardic Sidurim, but one comes from a Sephardic origin, one comes from an Ashkenazi origin. One is Akedah v'Ne'akad v'Mizbeach, which we sing on Rosh Hashanah before blowing the shofar, and it was written by Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel ibn Abbas, who lived. Son converted to Islam. Yes, true, and whose son converted to Islam, and we see the son of Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel ibn Abbas. And the other poem is Imafes Rova Aken, which we read every day in the Selihot, which was written by Rabbi Ephraim Bar Ptahya of Regensburg in Germany. One of the few Ashkenazi pieces of liturgy that found their way into our Siddur. We don't know exactly how, but it's a German Selihah that is in the Sephardic Siddur. And what we'll do, we'll contrast them with each other. They both speak about the Akedah. So it's fascinating to look at both, and we'll I will do it in a threefold. The Ashkenazi piyut, the biblical story, the biblical narrative, and the Sephardic piyut, and see the differences and similarities between them. With that, we'll conclude tonight. Imafes Ovakin. We read it every day in the Selichot.
That's Ashkenaz.
Yes.
It's an Ashkenazi piyut. Yes.
Rabbis.
Yeah. So 1 second. Should we? Yeah. Okay. So we'll stop the broadcast now.